Welcome back. We are here. Football is back, although Chris may feel differently given some of the football content he created this summer. But NFL is back at Occupy Fantasy. Preseason, the best time of the year. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and we're here with some NFL preseason DFS picks, lineup advice, DraftKings and FanDuel for tonight's Hall of Fame game, Chicago Bears, Houston Texans. It's good to be back. I am the co-founder. I'm here with Chris, our NFL/football manager at Occupy Fantasy. Chris, welcome back, man. What's up?
Brian, it's been a whole, I think, 6 weeks since I put out some DFS content for football-related things. UFL championship was like mid-June, so we're excited for spring football to be over and for preseason to be here. There's going to be a lot of spring football players we'll talk about over the next 3 weeks. Yes, I know everyone's looking for us to give some of the top plays here for Houston and Chicago here tonight on DraftKings and FanDuel, but I think it would be a waste of everybody's time if we also didn't discuss a little bit what we're going to be doing over the next 3+ weeks for NFL preseason. Brian, we're going to have a daily plug article for every single day of the NFL preseason, breaking down the top plays for both the classic slates and the single game / showdown slates on DraftKings and FanDuel. So that is what you get here at Occupy Fantasy, of course, alongside access to our models and any other articles we're doing for every other sport on the website. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, we're actually going to be doing a live stream and or a pre-recorded video for every day there is a preseason game. So make sure you are subscribed here on YouTube to be notified when those go live. And what we're going to do in this particular show, it is a showdown slate, one single game on DraftKings and FanDuel. We'll start with the low-risk plays, the players we expect to play the most, the players we expect to have the most ownership, the core plays that you want to build your lineups around tonight. And then we'll go ahead and talk about some of the high-risk plays, how to try to win the $50,000 top prize on DraftKings, the $10,000 top prize on FanDuel. And this is a live Q&A. So if you have questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat. I see we got a lot of people in here so far, too many to name. We appreciate you all stopping by. And if you're just lurking, watching, say hi. We'd appreciate it as well. So let's jump into it, Chris. Hall of Fame game for the uninitiated. Defenses are the best plays on the board, typically because we have such fractured playing time. We have likely 3 quarterbacks playing for both teams, a bunch of running backs, specifically for Houston. We'll talk about Chicago's running back situation in a second, and a bunch of receivers playing. Now, this is very different than most preseason showdown slates, Hall of Fame game in particular. And Chris, we're going to see elevated ownership on these two defenses. So what is your strategy for playing the Texans or the Bears, depending on the contest type that you're in?
Playing low risk contests specifically tonight, you need to play both of them. I think it's pretty that simple. You can play one of them at captain, one of them at flex. You can play both of them at flex. And I think we like specifically running back Demetric Felton with the Bears the best out of like skill players tonight. So we see him as a pretty strong low risk captain. But the bottom line is if we can project a floor of about 5 points from these defenses, even though that doesn't sound like a lot, guys, that is going to be a lot in this particular game. So that's why the defenses are super important. As far as playing them at captain in a high risk contest, Brian, I don't know if you feel differently. I think it's pretty difficult to find your path to taking down the big GPP, the large field $50,000 to first contest on DraftKings and the large $10,000 prize contest over there on FanDuel with a defense at captain or MVP. So there are better ways, I think, to attack that format, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We saw it a few years ago, the Steelers defense in a lower scoring Hall of Fame game get there 15 to 20% at captain. We'll see similar numbers on the Texans and Bears tonight. But historically, the easiest wins, when I say easy, it means your path to get to the top is much clearer when we have a lower owned positional player captain that is the highest scoring player on the slate. So sure, I'm going to mix in defenses at captain and large field, but I'm going to differentiate in the flex spots as well. But if you're playing maybe small field contests or you're playing just a handful of lineups, it is better to just use those guys in flex. And like you said, even if they only score 3 or 5 points, that doesn't seem like a lot if you have traditional showdown brain. But the key is if you can get 6 spots scoring points, Chris, that is a huge edge in preseason showdown.
Yeah, especially here at the beginning of the preseason. This is like pre-week 1 stuff. That's pretty much why each of these offenses has completely ruled out the players that you're used to seeing on the field on Sundays and Sunday nights and Thursdays and whatnot. So just a completely different game environment. What we have done for this slate and what we will do for every single slate is dive into to all of the news from practices, from training camp, from beat reporters that are really plugged in with each of these squads to dig into what is happening in each of these games. And we've gone through that a little bit here for the Bears and the Texans in the plug, which is available at OccupyFantasy.com for you subscribers. But, for the YouTube viewers, I guess we'll give you a little bit of a sneak peek of what you're getting here. I think we can start with the Bears, Brian, specifically with Chicago. Looks like we've got 4 quarterbacks in total on the roster, but we do know that Caleb Williams will not be one of them that plays tonight. So only 3 quarterbacks. And there is a little bit of consensus from the Chicago beat that the 4th quarterback might be the best one to play tonight, right?
Yeah, so we actually don't have any concrete news on playing time for any of the quarterbacks tonight. There is some speculation on Twitter that Case Keenum might not play a lot. It is purely from touts. It is nothing from beat reporters. We have different reporters saying different things. So until we get pregame warmups and we get some solidified news, all 6 of these quarterbacks are in the same bucket. All 6 being Tyson Bagent, Austin Reed, Brett Rippon, and on Houston's side, Davis Mills, Case Keenum, and Tim Boyle. Now, if you've never played preseason DFS or you need a reminder, really what we're looking for to hammer are situations where a team is very thin at a specific position due to injuries or rest. And we have that with Chicago. In fact, they were so thin that they signed a guy off the street a few days ago, and we expect him to play a ton tonight. Now, DeAndre Swift will not play. He is a starter. Both Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson, who, if you played regular season DFS or you played best ball, you know that they're in the mix. They're likely on the roster. They were not on the practice field that was preparing for this game. They were with the starters yesterday. We don't expect them to play. Travis Homer and Ian Wheeler, the other running backs on their roster, they have not practiced in at least a week. So Demetric Felton, who was just signed, was actually in the optimal Hall of Fame game lineup last year, is going to play a ton of snaps. We have a sneaky play to go along with him. But Chris, Felton is a guy that if you're not considering him, you're basically drawing dead in most contest types.
So Brian, as an MME player who is maxing this contest tonight, I believe, is Felton kind of one of those lock and load 100% plays for you, or how are you approaching him?
I'm not 100%. I'm playing a lot. I think the field's going to get up to, I would say 65, 70%, I would imagine, is what his total ownership will be. I'm trying to get around that, but I do want some lineups that do not have him just for it's preseason, right? He could play 3 quarters and score 4 points. If you've played preseason before, you know that is well within the range of outcomes. But we also, and we'll talk about the high-risk section here in a second, there's another guy who could steal some snaps from him. It's not a guarantee that he plays a ton, and if that happens, that obviously lowers his floor and ceiling. But if we're looking at median outcomes, he is the next best option outside of the 2 defenses because he's probably going to be on the field for at least half a game, potentially more.
Yep. I think I want to touch on running backs for Houston's side as well before we dive into pass catchers, Brian, because I think that's running back in general, probably the next position group that's quote-unquote the safest to play. With Houston, we know Joe Mixon's out. Apparently, Dameon Pierce is going to play tonight because I guess his job is not completely safe with the Texans. They have Dare Ogunbowale as a 3rd down back. They have Cam Akers, who they just signed this past, I think last week actually, but he's coming off an Achilles injury. Then there's 3 more guys that are interesting for tonight's game behind all of those players. We have J.J. Taylor, who formerly of the Patriots, playing on this team. We have a rookie undrafted free agent in British Brooks, who was Tar Heel from North Carolina in college. And then I think we have the running back with Houston that everyone is most interested in tonight, rookie Jawar Jordan, who they drafted in the 6th round this past April. So that's a lot of names with Houston, and it's not as clear here as it is with Chicago who's going to have the most playing time. So that's why we like Felton the most at the position. But I do think in this Houston backfield, we can safely assume that if Pierce plays, he's probably starting. He's probably going to play like that first drive or 2 and be done for the day. I don't know how much Ogunbowale is going to get. I feel like Cam Akers is really a speculative play in general. I don't know how much playing time he's going to get with that injury. So it feels like that group of 3 running backs I mentioned at the end there is where most of the playing time here is going to come for Houston. Let me know if you agree or disagree and if you have a favorite from that group.
Yeah, it's a really interesting situation because if this was a regular main slate in preseason, let's say 3, 4 games on the slate, we would probably just X out this position group. We're not interested in playing Houston Texans. But like you said, in Hall of Fame games, running backs end up in the optimal lineup at a really high rate. And Pierce is interesting because there's a lot of speculation about him needing to prove himself as the running back two. His running back two role isn't secure after having a down year last year. There's also speculation about a potential trade. And I think if you're mass multi entering a bunch of lineups, you have to include Pearson a decent chunk because there is a way that he plays a quarter and being the best running back of the group in the game. In fact, he could be in the optimal lineup. Now,
Yeah.
it's very volatile. He could play a couple of snaps. He could play a quarter. We really don't know. Ogunbowale, I agree with, special teams guy. Know what he's been doing. Third down back. Role is solidified on the team, so I'm not sure he plays a ton. But it is these other guys that are interesting. Jawar Jordan has gotten the most camp hype, can catch passes out of the backfield, will be the most popular of the group. But for that reason, I mean, we've seen guys like, let's think John Kelly in last year's Hall of Fame game. Let's think Nathan Cottrell in the Jags game a couple of years ago. When we get lower owned running backs who will see the field and will see touches, they are extremely valuable in large field tournaments. For that reason, Chris, you have to be considering in mass multi-entry 10 plus lineups, JJ Taylor, British Brooks, and even Cam Akers, even if we don't think he's fully healthy or likely to make the team, he will likely see some snaps tonight. So I think in tournaments, all these guys are extremely interesting.
Yeah, and I certainly don't mean this in like a denigrating way to these guys that are trying to make an NFL roster, but we are probably slightly more interested in these guys that fit the proverbial kind of camp body profile, Brian. And it does seem like way at the bottom of the depth chart, British Brooks, JJ Taylor are probably like the best options for that. So I am interested in the upside with Jawar Jordan, but it just feels like he's closer to the type of player that Houston wants to see make this roster. Maybe they stash on the practice squad or something like that. So you almost don't want to show too much there because you don't want the league to claim him or anything like that. Whereas you kind of know JJ Taylor isn't really a massive contributor, but he can definitely be trusted to carry the rock a little bit in these games. And British Brooks is probably right there in the same category. He's got a tough uphill battle here to make the roster. So I would just expect those two guys maybe to have higher ceilings than the rest of the group here at running back. With pass catchers, and I was very deliberate by saying that earlier, I want to focus on the tight ends first before we go to the wide receivers because it just feels like there's an easier path on both these teams, frankly, to some guys getting a ton of playing time tonight because there's not as much competition there and they have kind of that dedicated role in each offense, right? So I think on the Houston side is where we're going to see the most popular tight end tonight, Brian. So there's two guys specifically on Houston I think are the best plays. I think there's three we're expecting to play tonight. That's Cade Stover, Tegan Quatoriano. Those are my two favorites. And then there's also Dalton Keene, who we've seen in preseasons before, and he's never really done much, but he's also on the Texans here.
Yeah, exactly. So the tight end position is really interesting. Like a lot less competition than receiver. Just really quickly, just a couple of points. The site you saw up, this is ourlads.com. They are extremely fast and accurate in updating their depth chart. So great resource for preseason DFS. And before we talk about tight ends, Chris, it's extremely boring. But two other low risk plays that we have to discuss. We don't have to talk about for more than 15 seconds. Are the kickers, just one kicker on each roster, Cairo Santos, Kaimi Fairbairn. Both of them are great plays, likely high ownership, but gives you some sort of floor in your lineups, right?
Absolutely. This is something to be explicitly clear about for tonight, and then I think safely into the first week of the preseason if you're playing these single game contests. Yes, it looks weird. Yes, it feels wrong. Do not be afraid to play both defenses, both kickers in low risk if there's no consensus on clear skill position plays, because those are just your safe guaranteed points you can get in these contests. So each of Fairbairn, Santos tonight, totally fine in low risk.
Yeah, and I will say that as much as we talk about what we know right now, I would say probably 75% of what we expect to happen is researched up until now. The other 25% changes. It's similar to NBA DFS in that regard. It changes during pregame warmup. So we'll probably get some news here in the next hour and a half that will dictate some ownership and some playing time for some of these guys. So make sure you stick around to the plug. Make sure you're locked into our Discord, occupyfantasy.com/Discord, for those updates. And it will really determine. So Brevin Jordan is a question in the chat. Yes, he's a Houston Texan. Let's show you our These are the notes from our daily plug, OccupyFantasy.com. If we look at Brevin Jordan, he left practice early Tuesday. Is no guarantee to play tonight. He's likely on the roster anyways. So we are anticipating him to be out. If he is, it opens up even more snaps for Cade Stover, rookie 4th-round pick, and Tegan Quitoriano, who had caught some touchdowns in the regular season last year. Cade Stover, generally in preseason DFS, drafted rookie tight ends perform extremely well as far as fantasy scoring goes, because one, they're talented enough to get drafted, and two, the teams want to progress their progress and get them the ball in preseason. So we see guys like this who end up being great fantasy plays in the preseason, and Cade Stover is no different. Now Chicago, they have some guys too. Stephen Carlson has gotten a bunch of work in camp. So has Tommy Sweeney, and they're likely without their top 3 tight ends. If we look at Chicago's depth chart here on our lads, Cole Kmet starter, Gerald Everett injured and also not going to play. Mercedes Lewis is 106 years old and he will not play in the Hall of Fame game either. That leaves us 3 guys on their roster as well. So to your point, Chris, when you have 3 tight ends to compete with, it is much different than the 9 or 12 receivers that these other guys are having to share the field.
Yeah, and these guys fall in the end zone. They got a really, really good chance of being in that optimal lineup tonight. So I think we have this. We have all of these guys that we named at tight end ranked fairly high for our high risk rankings tonight. Cade Stover, by far our favorite in the group, but I do think any of these 5-6 guys from both teams at tight end by far are excellent plays. Now, we teased it a couple of times earlier. Someone we like in high risk at wide receiver. There's a player tonight, Brian, that I think fits pretty nicely for a high risk captain that may actually also see some work at running back, who's playing wide receiver for the Chicago Bears. Talk to me about what you've read and how you're feeling about Velus Jones Jr.
Yeah, so if you're in the Dynasty community or best ball, Velus Jones was notoriously being drafted as an extremely old receiver out of Tennessee, and really has been a bust up to this point. Has been a decent kick returner in some regards, but he is coming into a make or break year. And most beat reporters initially expect him to get a bunch of run at receiver tonight just because he's a guy that has to prove it, and they need to get him the ball. And he's been getting a lot of targets in practice recently to try to prove it as well. But due to the injuries at running back, or maybe just another way to get him on the roster, Chris, right? We see some guys who have contracts that they don't want to let go of. Let's see if we can use him in another way, get him in the backfield. As of July 30th, which was Tuesday, he was getting backfield reps. And I imagine whether or not, Chris, that has to do with them trying to get him just some sort of role on the team, it could really be that they don't want to risk Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson. Those guys were not on the practice field with players who were going to play in this game on Wednesday. Velus Jones was, and taking reps at running back, which leads me to believe, again, we don't know exactly how many reps, but he's going to get work at running back tonight. He's going to split with Demetric Felton, and that makes him a great play as a result because he's going to be a third of the ownership of Felton at the most.
Absolutely. This is a player that had a really, really strong 40 time, 4.31 at the 2022 Combine. So even for an old prospect, you're getting a fast player. That's important if he's going to get work out of the backfield. It's a higher floor type of workload if he gets a couple of touches tonight out of the backfield, Brian. Just putting the ball in his hands, and if he can break a tackle and get downfield, then we're very happy, right? So We're not going to talk about Velus Jones much this year, I think, in regular fantasy football context, but in terms of the Hall of Fame game, if he's going to be playing a ton of snaps at wide receiver with the best quarterbacks that Chicago has to offer early in the game, and then he's going to get some backfield opportunities as well, whether those are traditional between the tackles running back touches or think more like your Cordero Patterson, or I guess in more kind of recent vintage, like a Kadarius Toney type of role, if you will, for the Chiefs there. That's still a higher floor than really any of these other receivers that aren't going to have backfield touches, right? So I think we are a little bit different than some of our peers in the content provider space with Velus Jones. I'll just come out and say it, ranked as our favorite high-risk captain play on this slate tonight.
Yeah, dual threat guy, favorite high-risk captain, absolutely. On a team where the backfield is extremely thin, and his likely backfield mate, is going to be one of the most popular players on the slate. Excellent high-risk play. Question in the chat from Chris, does Velus Jones return kicks as well? He does, and he is in the mix for that job. However, just note that in preseason, they tend to rotate that job to get as many guys as possible to get a look at them. So if Velus Jones does return kicks, it might just be 1 or 2. But again, that is enough to maybe pair him with the Bears defense if you get the rare double dip return touchdown. Now, if you're around last year, this is not the Austin Watkins play. Chris did the video. We put it in our daily plug. He was our top high risk play last year. Austin Watkins coming out of the USFL was just 2% owned last year. Velas was going to be much higher than that. Austin Watkins caught the touchdown, obviously was important. Helped one of our members win the $20,000 in the GPP last year. So Chris, he's no Watkins, but in the same vein as being underrated by the fantasy community.
Yeah, just to stay on the returner point, it does look like the Bears have DeAndre Carter also listed as their punt/kick returner tonight. So I would expect to see those two guys rotating return duties for Chicago tonight. And speaking of DeAndre Carter, just to talk about the other wide receivers, there are other wide receivers we like tonight other than Velus Jones. He just has that unique role we wanted to make sure we highlighted. We have, looks like 9 receivers we expect to play in some way, shape, or form for the Bears tonight. And we're expecting Velus, but also Carter, and then Tyler Scott to be in that kind of starting wide receiver position for this game specifically for Chicago. I think of that group, Brian, we're most uncertain with the playing time for Tyler Scott. Do you agree? I mean, I think this is a situation where Scott is seen as a valuable asset for Chicago. He's ranked as their like 4th wide receiver, which means, does he have a valuable enough regular season role already locked in that maybe he doesn't play a lot tonight? Or is he closer to actually competing for that 4th wide receiver role, so he has to go out there and prove it, and therefore he does play tonight? So for those of you in the chat or just watching that were wondering about how we feel about Tyler Scott, I think that kind of sums it up. It's unclear right now how Chicago truly values him. If they do value him highly, even though this sounds counterintuitive, we think he plays less tonight. If they don't value him super highly, then he may play a ton of snaps here today.
Yeah, it's really interesting because we have 2 guys in basically the same exact spot on opposite sides. We have Tyler Scott and we have John Mechie. Both guys who have had tremendous camps. Both guys who were expected to contribute when they were drafted. In Mechie's case 2 years ago, in Scott's case a year ago. Both have been absolutely lighting up camp. Both of the number 4 receivers heading into this season, more than likely. And we see various approaches from teams when guys like this, these number 4 high-profile receivers are on the field. Sometimes they play a ton in preseason. Sometimes they play very little. So it's very volatile. But Chris, judging by the lines we see on Underdog Fantasy and DraftKings Pick 6, Prize Picks, judging by what the industry is saying, John Mechie will be much higher owned than Tyler Scott. So if I'm willing to take a shot on one, it would be Tyler Scott. But again, just note that these guys could literally not play. They probably will. A couple of snaps. 2, they could play a quarter and a half, maybe even a half, depending on what the coaches are doing tonight.
And I think the type of thing where I love looking at those stats for Underdog or here on Pick 6 because they are a great proxy for projected ownership here. And we're in a situation where these guys are all probably going to play between like, let's say like 15 to like 25 snaps each. So like, this is not your traditional football game environment. It's a very uneven coin that we're flipping here, but at receiver specifically, right? All we're looking for is just like one long play that a guy hauls in for a touchdown is going to get them in the optimal lineup. And the reality is all of these guys are capable of that in the amount of playing time that we're expecting. So you can look at how ownership is concentrating on some of these plays, a guy like a John Mechie or a Tyler Scott, even to a lesser degree with Chicago. And you can automatically get different by not playing those guys and playing somebody else. If you are the type of player that's only going to be playing a handful of lineups and you're trying to win the big prize and have an easier path to getting there, if you're correct with your plays, that's what I think my preferred method is, Brian, just purely based off of game theory here, specifically in the Hall of Fame game.
Yeah, and what about positional? In our daily plug, and again, if you guys have access, you can at occupyfantasy.com. Link is also in the description below. We're talking about number of players per position per lineup. We'd never see more than 2 quarterbacks in the optimal lineup in Hall of Fame games. Mm-hmm. Generally, it's 1. We rarely see 2 receivers even. Sometimes just 1, sometimes 0. Are you limiting the number of receivers per lineup? Are you considering just one receiver per lineup? And are there some lineups where you may not play any receivers at all?
The last point is the one I think is most interesting. I think I personally play like 1 to 3 lineups a night. I'm a low volume kind of player in terms of lineups because I like to really think about the lineups that I have carefully. And I think in this particular game, I'm probably going to have a core of both defenses and Felton. So those will be in all of my lineups tonight across both sites. I think I'll probably play my favorite quarterback, and then I'll probably pick one of these tight ends we talked about, and then rotate in like my favorite pass catcher around that in like my 2 to 3, potentially 5 lineups if I'm feeling good about the contest tonight. So I guess to answer your question, I think I am setting myself to a max of just like one wide receiver per lineup because unless this game completely shoots out, which we do not see that happen in Hall of Fame games. These are typically ugly games to watch, low scoring. I think it's pretty safe to build that way here tonight. Limit yourself to one wide receiver. I think it's okay to go with like maybe a couple running backs if you feel pretty good about a couple of these guys. I would think, Brian, that it would be a running back from each team if you were doing that, although it's not unheard of for them to be on the same team. But that's just kind of my lean and my gut on that. I don't think it's necessarily required to even play a quarterback at all. I think for those of you who were with us last year, we felt very, very strongly about, I think it was Dorian Thompson-Robinson with Cleveland playing like more than half the game. So that's why he was a pretty heavily owned play in that game. But every game is going to be so different here in preseason based off of the news that we get. And just to kind of be very clear about that here, this is a game where we do not have a good sense of what's going on at quarterback, at least not yet. To your point, over the next 90 minutes here, we're going to be grinding news right up until lock. Something could change, but at this point, there's like 6-7 quarterbacks that could play tonight, and they're all ranked kind of equal for us. So I think just kind of thinking about that, maximizing floor is important in both low and high risk contests tonight. And it's only going to take being right about those like 1 to 2 spots that everybody's going to be different on tonight for you to separate yourself from the field. You just really don't want to take zeros tonight. You find any way to just get points at all your spots tonight, and you're definitely going to be in a good position to at least cash all your lineups here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk a little bit more about the quarterbacks, a little bit more about playing time expectations, and especially late lock news. Before I get into that, just know that we started a second YouTube channel, a secondary channel here specifically for our best ball content. Chris and our best ball guy Chuck will be live at 6:45 Eastern over on that channel. We're doing a giveaway, first 500 subscribers to that channel, so make sure you're subscribed. If you got your lineups in, go watch that or watch it on replay. 6:45 Occupy Best Ball. Links in the description. Links on our channel as well. Go check that out after this show. Now, to that point, quarterbacks. The betting markets industry anticipates the starters to be the highest fantasy producers, Davis Mills and Tyson Bagent. However, I'll pull up our daily plug really quickly. Again, Chris, we do not have confirmation on any of this. It could change during pregame warmups. But if you look at what just the first Houston Texans note that we have one beat saying Davis Mills expected to play extensively. We have another beat saying expect a lot of drives from Tim Boyle. That's direct competition there. And if you look at Bagent being the highest projected quarterback for Chicago side, based on the industry, based on these prop lines, the news doesn't agree because Tyson Bagent, one beat, thinks he will exit quickly because he's locked into the number 2 role. They also have Brett Rippon and Austin Reed. In fact, that one beat projects Austin Reed to lead. So, to that point, we could see Bagent the highest on Chicago quarterback, Chris, but not actually be the one that we want.
Yeah, and the stat line, specifically an underdog, just because that's what I'm looking at right now, definitely reinforced that. It looks like Davis Mills has hit, they got a stat at 88.5 passing yards, which is the highest kind of line of every quarterback that is expected to play on both sides tonight. Bagent, 75.5. Got Boyle, 66.5. Austin Reed, 61.5. That's kind of the order of like the top 4 there. Looks like Brett Rippon, 60.5. Case Keenum, 48.5. So, not that this was the point of this show, but if you were going to be mixing and matching some slips for pick 6 or here on Underdog for champions or pick'em contests, when we have uncertain situations like this and we have super, relatively speaking, high lines for the guys that are starting the game, I think one of our favorite opportunities in preseason is to kind of take the lower side on those, right?
Absolutely. And one of the nice things here, if you play like DraftKings Pick 6 UFC, or you play underdog when there's only 2 teams, there's correlation aspects here. There's cannibalization. So if you play under on Davis Mills, you can play over on Case Keenum or Tim Boyle. If you play under on Tyson Bagent, you can go over on Rippon. And that just makes a lot of sense and really boosts the correlative aspect of your slips. So just keep that in mind as we build here. It's very different than other pick slip sports. Preseason is definitely its own beast. We think about correlation the typical way. If a quarterback does this, his receivers will do that. In preseason, where everyone's fighting for the same playing time, a teammate's quarterback inversely correlated is a fantastic play. So, and again, to your point, Chris, they being the field likes Mills, it likes Bagent. We're not necessarily sure that's the case. And again, we may find out here in the next 90 minutes. And I can't remember if we hit at the top of the show, but a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of Twitter touts are on Case Keenum unders just for the sheer fact that he's old. That literally doesn't mean anything. He played 28 snaps in preseason week 1 last year. So we've seen Case Keenum's underdog fantasy stat drop from 60 or 70 something all the way down to what you said, 48.5 now. That may seem sharp, but in an information-based sports where there's no information available, I'm not sure that's the right move. And again, maybe he sits out, or maybe we get news here shortly, but I'm not necessarily sure that's the case.
The type of situation here, Brian, where this is, like I said earlier, this clues us in to projected ownership or real ownership, I guess, tonight. Case Keenum is probably going to be like close to like 0% owned tonight. And is it impossible or is it crazy that he outscores Mills or Tim Boyle here? Even if he doesn't play more than those guys, you get a touchdown drive out of him or 2, he's probably going to be in the optimal lineup, even if he plays less than those other guys. So that is where we're at here.
Sounds like Chris's fire alarm went off. Chris, I hope you're okay. Give me the thumbs up when you're back here. That is his smoke alarm. So hopefully there's no actual fire in Chris's house. Chris, when you're ready, hop back in. But that'll just about do it for the show. Final questions. Let's get him into the chat. That's Chris's smoke alarm, letting him know that he's got a best ball show in 15 minutes, perhaps. So you guys have questions, throw them in the chat. We'll answer them here live. Again, we will be in Discord until lock and through lock to sweat the rest of the game out as well. Totally not the FBI. Ed is in the chat. What's up, man? Good to see you back here. Lots of old faces rejoining the chat. Again, final questions. Let's get them in. And let's see. Anything else we need to discuss? I think we'll talk about some super flyers, right? Guys that are 1% owned. We talked about Austin Watkins in this game last year. If we look at receivers that we like that may play a little bit, I'll go one from each team. And Chris is officially gone now, so we'll see what happens when Chris comes back. But if we look at the Houston side, a guy that I'm interested in is, let's see here. Where is he? He is, let's just go to our notes on OccupyFantasy.com. And Houston, receiver, we got like Quintez Cephas, literally a starting receiver in this league until he had the gambling problem. So he's interesting. Jaden Janke is a guy that is extremely interesting. Rookie, undrafted free agent, did have 10 touchdowns in his final collegiate year. Has caught passes from Mills as well, could play a little bit more than we expect. So Jaden Janke's that 1% receiver from the Houston side. And if we look at Chicago, their back end guys are not as exciting. Peter LeBlanc, 4 touchdowns in 5 college seasons. John Jackson, 40 receptions, 0 touchdowns in 5 seasons. Not that interesting. So I think the more interesting 1% play come from Houston side. But guys like Freddie Swain, DeAndre Carter, veterans who could see the field are potential options. Chris, you got your smoke alarm handle, buddy? What's up?
Dude, apparently the house cannot handle the fire that we're spitting on this show tonight. No, looks like my carbon monoxide detector was going off. So if you guys just start to see me go like, call the police, please. No, we're good. Thanks. So we're talking about Pete LeBlanc here. I should have probably just stayed off of the camera. My God, we're really going that far down the list. Yeah, all right. Fair. So 1% plays. I did hear you talking about that because I've had my earbuds in the whole time. I think one of the players that I was most interested in here, I know you all that have been watching the whole time know that I'm a little out of pocket now, so just give me a second here to get back into it. On the Houston side, I think I just heard you mention Quintez Cephas. He definitely was high on my list. What are you thinking about Ben Skoranek? We've seen him perform in like regular season NFL before, previously of the Rams. I don't really hear or read anyone talking about him much tonight. We just have like a note that looks like he was playing with Tim Boyle's unit a little bit for Houston, but that just kind of stood out to me, Brian, as a potential receiver that we know, we know like he's not completely terrible, right? And he's going to be playing against worse competition than he faced in regular season games. So I think that's a pretty good low-owned play here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Houston's side certainly has the more intriguing wide receiver options at the end of their depth chart. Let's answer these final questions in the chat. One says from Matt, Longtime member. What's up, Matt? Any idea what Velas's captain percentage would be in large field? I would say roughly 2%, somewhere in that range, I would think, just based on previous year's ownership and how it shakes out. Sterling, and then another question from Michael. Do we have inactives? What's the best site for starting lineups? OccupyFantasy.com. Our daily plug that you see on screen here, we will update with any news. Our projections are in there now. Any news that changes, we will update the plug and also our Discord as well. Inactives, there's no official inactives time window for preseason DFS, but beat reporters will tweet it out as they get it, as they see guys in or out of pregame warm-up. So just stay tuned to our Twitter or our Discord for the latest breaking updates as well. And then 2G, too great. Is there any way to get different other than playing two defenses? Yes. Captain differentiation, flex play differentiation. Our daily plug that you see on screen here has an entire lineup strategy section, how to build lineups for specific contest types. So make sure you go read that after you finish watching this video. Chris, I think we'll close it out on that note. I love that we are back. Great to do these shows with you. Again, we'll have these shows every day of the preseason. Any final thoughts on a Hall of Fame game or anything else we have to look forward to?
I would just say, because I don't think we've covered like bankroll allocation. Obviously, NFL is back. We're super happy to have it here. This is not a game where I think, in general, we feel great about the plays outside of like the defenses and Demetric Felton. So I would advocate for, playing light tonight. This is definitely not, I hope anyway, going to be like one of the better preseason slates that we feel strongly about. We will have nights that we feel like we've got a strong edge and that we've done a pretty good job identifying plays that the field is not on. I think the field is going to be pretty close to correct as far as how they're allocating ownership tonight. So just be mindful of that. There's going to be, like 10, 12 more nights of preseason slates here, plus like different slates on different nights, right? Like late night slates and stuff like that, and all the single games, where I think we'll have a clearer edge, where it gets more confusing for the average player to figure out how they can play different slates. We're here to give you that information edge by breaking down the way each of these teams is preparing for these preseason games in practice. We are unhinged enough to do that for you, so we please advocate that you take advantage of that. I'm just really looking forward to it, and let's get a Velus Jones Jr. touchdown here, Brian. Let's do it.
Please. And I'm about to say, we didn't even talk about our biggest edge, which is our trend research, which we can't take advantage of in Hall of Fame game. However, stay tuned for next week and the week after. We have plenty of coaching trends. Our snap count and opportunity dashboard on the site is essential to building lineups for preseason DFS. I'm already looking forward to that next week. Final question here. It's from CW. Are two defenses usually optimal? So just really quick distinction here. The optimal lineup generally isn't found or needed to win in Hall of Fame game DFS, especially preseason DFS in general. So playing two defenses is a great way to add floor to your lineup. Really, if you're doing that, you hope to get 3+ points from both. Like Chris said, not take zeros, and find that 1 or 5% own play that goes off and is the one you actually need. Defenses, there's a very good chance that both are not in the top 6 high scorers on the slate, but it is a 99% plus chance of both actually score points, which is what you need from your flex spots in large field contests here on the slate, especially in smaller contests. So for Chris, follow him on Twitter at RooneyFFB. I'm at Brian Jester FF. We're at Occupy Fantasy. OccupyFantasy.com is where you get all this information. And make sure you subscribe to the channel here on YouTube to get notified when we go live or upload these videos for future preseason slates. Chris is going live with Chuck on our secondary channel, Occupy Best Ball, here in 5 minutes. So if you're interested in Best Ball, catch that live or on replay. Go subscribe. First 500 subscribers will be entered in a giveaway over there. Thanks for listening. I'm Brian. That's Chris. And good luck and enjoy. Football is back.